I thought I would kind of take you guys through a little bit of what got us to here, what started us off 10 years ago, because it's good to know the history of the place that you work. A lot of you know the history, but here's a succinct way to say it. In 2009, I was an owner of a company that sells herbal and vitamin products that had about 100 and something employees. So it's a kind of a big, successful company. And I was an entrepreneur, and I would have described myself at that time as a good-natured, materialist, atheist, non-spiritualist. In other words, anything that sounded supernatural to me was just by default false. So I heard people claiming that psychic phenomena, telekinesis, any form of communication between people that do not use sound or light was false. Any belief in consciousness, to have any, hard to explain influence over matter was false. Any idea that humans can have contact with humans from the future, like trans-temporal communication, false. So that was my belief system, because that sounded good to me. But I say sounded good to me because I never critically thought about it. I didn't try to think critically. I was kind of being a sheep, to tell you the truth. I was just following what I heard a lot of other people say. And I was always an amateur physics enthusiast, and so the people I looked up to be the sheep follower were what I looked at as the status quo, typical patent answer of a physicist. And I knew that most of them that I had ever heard said that all of that stuff is pretty much bullshit. So I just adopted their view. So then when my daughter Kesley was 10, on her 10th birthday, I decided to have her and me escape Earth's gravity fully 15 times for 30 seconds at a time. So we went in Peter Diamandis's zero-G planes that are hollowed out fuselages with gymnasium pads all around, and you get in there and it does parabolas, and for 30 seconds straight you're in a completely zero-G environment. I mean, the gravity is less than if you were on the surface. So then Peter finds out I'm a successful entrepreneur, and he asks me to do some pro bono consulting for the X Prize Foundation, which he's the founder of. And he was the founder of the company that did zero-G flights. So Stephanie and I go over to Santa Monica, and I try my best to give him some free marketing advice about how to better promote the X Prize Foundation. So I do that, and then he says, well, Clee, this book, Singularity is Near, by my friend Ray Kurzweil, kind of changed my whole perspective on reality and where humanity is going. You should check it out. And because I was an amateur physics enthusiast and I held highly educated people in the sciences in the highest regard, like they were the priests of society to me. And so since Peter had a medical degree and another advanced degree in aerospace technologies, I figured, well, he's a really scientifically geeky guy, so if it changed his life, that's pretty big words, so I better read this book. So I read the book, and it changed my life. You know, if you have a major epiphany or paradigm shift in your outlook, philosophically, scientifically, if it's major, it kind of changes your belief systems and assumptions so thoroughly that it can change your life. Like it just changes the decisions you might make, or what you might think or say, or whatever. So it blew me away, and it was this idea that we cannot take the rate of change from the past and apply it to the future. So you can't say, well, technology advanced in the previous 25 years at this rate. So then I take that rate and I slap it onto the next 25 years. So it's a big mistake in thinking to do that with exponentially changing technologies. So then Peter invites me to this meeting at NASA's Ames Center in Palo Alto, and it was kind of an exclusive invite-only meeting, and Larry Page, the founder of Google, was there, Pete Worden, the director of NASA's Ames Research Center, was there, and about 28 other famous kind of scientists and tech entrepreneurs. I mean, I know why Peter invited me, because he wanted me to donate to help them get this thing started. And that was fine with me, because I had this chance to be around all these super geeks, right? Because I was kind of geeky, you know, and so in my private life and just the things I chose to read and consume. So I was kind of shifted at that point, because being an entrepreneur starting in my 20s, I, would work like 70 hours a week, and you don't really think about, philanthropy or donating your time, or you don't think about how to help the world, because you're just trying to fight to stay alive and to grow this company. You don't have time to breathe. But anyway, being around these 30 people, they all had this this intention to help change the vector of humanity, because their view was that governments and universities, academia, were not necessarily gonna change the vector, right? Water resources globally, the atmospheric changes and global warming, and all kinds of other major problems that if solved would impact 1 billion or more people, what Peter calls, these high impact solutions. So Singularity University, and then Ray Kurzweil was there. So it was really this brainchild of Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis to basically create a kind of think tank and an educational center in close association and with friendliness with NASA to synthesize technologies that are riding Moore's Law. So that, for us at Singularity University, is strong AI, nanotech, genetics, and robotics. And so all of those technologies and certain, scanning technologies. So those technologies benefiting from the doubling, the approximate rate of doubling of computational power every 18 months on average. That exponential was also propelling a certain class of technologies like those to also exponentially increase. And so our idea was, in universities, things have become so specialized that you have to spend your whole career within a niche in science. So things get siloed. And so at Singularity University, we would cherry pick the technologies that are riding Moore's Law, and we would cross-pollinate them. So we would bring experts together from strong AI and genetics, for example, and we would specifically focus on tackling humanity's grand challenges. That is, a solution that if achieved would impact 1 billion or more people. So anyway, that felt really cool to me because I was taken back by all of these rich people and these Nobel laureate scientists, people that they were not doing this to get more famous or more rich. They really wanted to help. I mean, they really believed that the world needed help and that governments and academia weren't necessarily going to do it. It's almost like it needed a fresh new approach that happens in tech, especially digital tech. A world where the shelf life of a technology is so short and nobody talks about this is how we used to do it. It's just a very progressive culture. So anyway, so I was the first person, I was sold, and I was the first person to raise my hand and offer money. And others offered, I offered what I could. Larry Page and others later offered more money, and it got started. Singularity University is still around today. So I get back to Los Angeles, and I can't really focus on money anymore because I'm thinking, God, that was really cool how all of these people who I respect were wanting to figure out how to change the course of humanity, like how to create high impact change for the good, not to line their pockets. So I went back and using my business skills that I learned when I was running a publicly traded version of our company for 5 years. And I created a complicated put and call structure that would allow somebody to have solar panels on their house for free with no cash. It was just a complicated structure called a put and a call, and it exploited the recently signed into act Obama allowance that the federal government would give about 25% coverage of your solar panels. The state governments were already averaging 25%. That was towards of 50%. And my cost of solar panels could be a little bit less than 50%. Long story short, it was a financial model where I would have a huge problem, and that is supply, because it was literally free to get the solar panels on people's homes, and I knew how to advertise. Like, I had a lot of experience getting a message out to hundreds of millions of gross impressions, and so I started looking at photovoltaic technology to understand it and to look at what type of solar panels I could get in unlimited supply. And I was very excited. I met with Peter Diamandis about it, and he was very excited, and we couldn't see any fly in the ointment as to why the business model. So we could carpet America with solar panels in several million homes in a short period of time. We would not have installation teams that worked for us. We would not make solar panels. We would arbitrage information, and it would be completely scalable. So then the bad news hit. I could do this business model if I were to use solar panels that would create a carbon footprint that would take 10 years to neutralize. So that would mean that I'm doing this to help a little bit with America's global, carbon footprint, and yet I would create a dent of that, a footprint that would take 10 years to neutralize. You get these on your house, and it's better that you didn't put them on your house because it would create more carbon output in the atmosphere to manufacture them until you get to 10 years, and then it neutralizes and then becomes good. So then, and that was because the only ones that were available in the virtually unlimited supply were this generation of solar panels that had that big of a carbon footprint excited about something that's going to make a high impact and it's fail-proof, and then finding out, well, you ethically can't do it. If you're ethically doing it to help with global warming, it's not going to help. It's going to hurt. So I had all this kind of built-up pressure of wanting to do good, like wanting to just be of service, you know? And then I couldn't, not with this. So then that really got me thinking, though, and I went down a rabbit hole. It got me thinking about what is energy in the first place? Because I started geeking out a little bit and really just understanding the physics of photosynthesis and the photovoltaic technology and basically everything related to that. And I started bumping into questions that I had about what are fundamental things? What is a fundamental mass, right? What is energy? And these very fundamental ideas. So couldn't do that, but I did start thinking a lot about physics. And I started staying home from work. I couldn't go to work because I went down this rabbit hole. You would have thought I had gone crazy, actually. So I would stay home from work, and Stephanie, who was my assistant, she would probably wonder most mornings, where is Clete? It's like 1 o'clock and he's not here, like every day. And I was at home in these tunnel vision sessions, asking questions and then writing down answers to the questions. I found that to be a helpful device because I thought that my subconscious was smarter and had access to more combinatorics of synthesizing information than my conscious mind. So I would create this Socrates dialogue kind of thing where I'd ask a question, write it down, and then get some crazy answer, write it down. That leads to a more sophisticated question. That could lead to a diagram. That could lead to this or that. And so I did that for many weeks, for 4 hours at a time, and developed these stacks of paper with these diagrams, these writings, these questions. And at some point it evolved like sophisticated looking ideas. And so then I had this one idea, which I'm not going to explain this idea, but it seemed to be logical on one end, deductively logical, but then it seemed to run afoul of certain axioms and assumptions or so-called laws of physics. So I started, I decided I'm going to get PhD physicists to come in and tell me why this wouldn't work. So Frank Underdown was the first one. I flew him in, and he said, "Wow, this is really interesting. It seems like this idea that you have would work, but this is really novel, and I don't." I'm surprised. I can't really tell you why it wouldn't work, but I can tell you that on the other hand, there's some assumptions in physics that this would violate. And then Fong was the second one. And then I had like about 4 others, so there's about 6 of these. So I was going through this process, but one of the things, it wasn't important what the idea was. What was instructive for me is that I learned that these PhDs were admitting and telling me, Clee, look, let's cut to the chase. We physicists, there's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot we argue about. And one of the biggest problems is we don't really know what anything fundamental is. We know what it does, and we have these things called gauge symmetry physics that can tell us how one thing becomes another, but we don't really know things like why does the speed of light have the magnitude that it does, why is the gravitational and Planck's constants having the values that they have, and the biggest problem is we have these 2 pillars of physical theory, quantum mechanics, and general relativity, and there's this lot that we can't say and that we don't know until we can unify everything. And maybe then, if we unified everything, maybe that would lead to some understanding of why the fundamental constants have some values that they have from first principles. So Fong and I really hit it off in terms of being able to work together, because she was able to, you know how like when you play with children, you have to come down to their level and talk in their language and try to relate to them, or a dog. So Fong was able to do that with me because I didn't have the mathematical or physics training that she had, so she could communicate with me on my way of exploring the nature of reality, inquiring about what this place really is and how it works. So at that point, I started developing a sense of irreverence for the assumptions of modern physics. Not all of the assumptions, but some of the deepest ones. And I stopped being a sheep and just following without doing my own critical thinking. And I really like these Arthur C. Clarke laws. I gotta paste them here. When a distinguished but elderly scientist states that something is possible, he is almost certainly right. When he states that something is impossible, he is very probably wrong. So if you were to go and say to an elderly and distinguished scientist at a university that you think that it's possible that a mind can connect information theoretically with another mind that's non-local, he will say that that is impossible, even though he doesn't know the underlying unification theory that connects space-time theory, general relativity, with quantum mechanics. He will still say very confidently that that's impossible. The second law is the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. In other words, you have to take a risk to be politically chastised by your academic peers. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. We can rephrase that as things which are labeled as supernatural today, some of them will be labeled as science tomorrow. And the last one is, for every expert, there is an equal and opposite expert. And this was an important lesson for me, because if luck would have it that I would run into two scientists who would say, this is impossible, or this is the way this is, or this is the interpretation of this, I might accidentally assume that that is some hugely popular 98% consensus view among scientists. But the truth is, there's always an equally credible scientist who argues the opposite. So it allows the amateur scientist to be able to say, well, I don't have to just go with these one guys who seem to say that this is the only way it can be. So again, irreverence. Critical thinking. I'll tell you what this image of my odometer means in a moment. This is where it started getting weird. So around this time, right, I completely stopped working. Like at this point, I still had an office at Irwin Naturals, but I was not doing anything whatsoever, not looking at the company's financials, not making business decisions. I could not stand to talk to those people because all I could think about was this fundamental physics, right? really exciting to me to find out that physicists still did not really know at the deepest level what the hell this place really is. And that they were arguing about things that I thought were sacred, that I found that there were many that said, well, no, that's not sacred, we look at it this way. So I found this huge opportunity for discovery and wanted to give it a try, you know? Like you're at the circus and people are trying to hit that hammer to make that bell go up and you're like, okay, well, I want to give it a try, right? So I kind of started, the seed was planted in me, but I hadn't made the decision yet, that maybe I want to dedicate the rest of my life and all my money and all my hours on this planet to just this one thing and this one thing only. But where it got weird is I started realizing something that I couldn't believe I was realizing. Again, I was proud of being a dyed-in-the-wool materialist, a person who believed that nothing supernatural is possible. But then I started having two things. I started discovering certain peer-reviewed literature that was well done, that was implying that access to non-local information seems to be possible. And I started having personal experiences that it's possible, like a form of experimental evidence, and then looking at other people's published experimental evidence. My 9-year-old was remote viewing, which was blowing me away because I couldn't figure out how he could be tricking me, because he just wasn't sophisticated and old enough to figure out like a magician's trick. So he was able to see things and get information, and I would test it over and over and over. So I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to change my whole belief system and accept that even though we can't explain this, that it's real. And I was able to do some of these things. And I was like, what the hell? And then I started feeling like I was getting memories of the future. Like, you know, Einstein's theory of general relativity allows wormholes between future and past. And quantum mechanics allows entanglement between future and past. And those two theories aren't unified with a quantum gravity theory. And so we can invent conjectures like the no communication theorem, and we can try to say that the only way that a signal can mediate is by the speed of light, is by light, at finite speeds. And we can have all these assumptions and come up with logical reasons why something can't be, but then there could be other assumptions that might say, well, maybe it can be true, right? So basically, nowadays, my belief system is that space-time and all of reality is trans-temporal, trans-spatial, and that it is possible for a mind, consciousness, whatever that even is. Right? I don't know for sure what a consciousness is. But it seems to me that whatever a consciousness is, it may be able to get instant exchange, that is, no signal transmitting, with information or minds at different locations. And so I think always, well, in 1 year, our program will be at least 1% more advanced and rigorous than it is this year. So if I can kind of imagine that I'm remembering forward in time, maybe I can get some intuitions that I can then vet and think about and talk about next year. So following this flow of intuitions that was so new to me, right? I quickly became good at following it, and so I may have tuned in to a signal, you can call it, but not a signal that transmits at a rate of time of stuff like what we're doing now, right? Back then, 10 years ago, I could tune in, and what it was tuning me into was tetrahedra. This was before quasi-crystals. And And I had told some of the scientists who were working for me at the time, I said, all right, let's measure what the gap is when you take 5 tetrahedra and you have 4 of them kissed faces. And then that leaves a gap with in one place there will be a gap. And each of the dihedral angles is irrational. So you have 5 times an irrational number, which is an irrational number. And then you're left with the 2 vertices at the gap that have a distance between them. Let's measure what that is. And that was the first time that Fong and myself got excited about a number. So the number was 1/9. And the reason we were excited about it is because it was unexpected to get such a nice looking rational number from 5 times an irrational number, right? 5 times arc cosine of 1/3 as the dihedral angle of the tetrahedron. We just didn't expect that, but that's what it was. And so then I said, well, what if we could make that gap, right, that thing that Buckminster Fuller calls the unzipping angle, what if we could close it up and make all 5 faces kiss? So we have that edge that they share at the center. We're going to keep the center of that edge locked in so that they all can only rotate on the center of the shared edge at the axis. So we would do a rotation from the outside edge center through the opposite edge at the shared center along the axis. And so we'd have to first evenly space it. So we take that 1/9 gap and then we'll take that and evenly distribute it so that there's an equal gap between all 5 and then rotate them. And at first, at least, maybe Garrett or one of the guys said, well, that shouldn't be possible, right? That it can close. And this is where I first started having this style that I have today of, all right, well, maybe it's not possible, but I have this feeling in my stomach that it is possible. So can you please just try it? So we did, and we found that you could close the gap. They could all close up, and that the value to close it was related to a 4-dimensional angle, arc cosine 1/4, minus 60 degrees. So that was interesting, that a 4-dimensional angle, that's the dihedral angle of the 4-dimensional tetrahedron, would close it up, and this 1/9 became this interesting obsession. So I had gotten into a car accident, and I used to drive very fancy cars, so I had this Bentley convertible, and I got into a fender bender, and I had this thing in the shop for a month, and the insurance paid for a rental car, and it was some Toyota truck or something. And I was at the office at Irwin Naturals, and like I would typically do at that time, I would go into these tunnel vision periods of obsessed laser-like focus on only one thing at a time. And I was focused on combinations of the 1/9. So 2/9, 3/9, 1/9, so on. And for no good reason, I wanted to find all the combinations that would add up to 2.9999, right? Because 1/9 digitally is 0.1111 to infinity, 2/9 is 0.222 to infinity, and so on. And so I wanted to find, I had no good reason. I was figuring out ways to take these 9s and get them to be 3 or 2.9999. And I did that for 4 hours obsessively, literally like I was crazy or something. And then I go down to the car at 2 o'clock in the morning, and my odometer is 2.